Good morning. Welcome to the Ethical Humanist Society of Chicago. My name is Svetlana Beckman, and I will be the moderator for today's program. Due to COVID-19, our programs are virtual for the time being. We obviously want to keep everyone safe and healthy. We do look forward to resuming our in-person gatherings just as soon as the time is right. For those who are new to the society, we are a self-governing, inclusive, caring community for those who seek a rational, compassionate philosophy of life without regard to belief or non-belief in a supreme being. We focus on the ethical values that bring people together, not on the beliefs that keep people apart. In the spirit of intellectual, philosophical, and artistic freedom, we come together to explore life, nature, and the universe. Like traditional religious communities, we celebrate births, conduct wedding ceremonies, and hold memorial services. Through our Golden Rule Sunday School, we teach our kids humanist principles, religious literacy, and critical thinking. We staff soup kitchens, pack lunches for the homeless, watch movies, and write fiction. And many of these activities, including the Sunday School, are still taking place, albeit virtually. Our Sunday morning programs give us an opportunity to learn about a wide variety of topics, including current events, philosophy, arts, and sciences, to name just a few. And today's presentation is part of our ongoing programming on art. The chat box will be open during the entire program, and please know that you will have lots of time after the program for the Q&A, so the speaker will address your questions then. And now on to today's program. Our speaker is Lee Bey. Lee is a Chicago-based photographer, writer, lecturer, and consultant. His work, his work documents and interprets built environments and the political, social, and racial forces that shape spaces and places. A former Chicago Sun-Times architecture critic, Lee's writing, reporting, and photography on architecture and urban design have been featured in Architectural Record, the Houston Chronicle, Crain's Chicago Business, WBZ Chicago Public Radio, Fox News, to name just a few. Lee also served as Deputy Chief of Staff for Planning and Design for Chicago Mayor Richard M. Daley, and was involved in a variety of issues that ranged from housing developments to architectural preservation from 2001 to 2004. The topic of Lee's talk is his book, Southern Exposure, Honoring Chicago's Southside Architecture. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you. Good to be here. And I should also say that Lee, as said off camera, has a case of the hiccups this morning. And of course, they were not here for the past half hour, and now they're back. So we'll get through this. But thank you, and it's so good to be here. About 20 years ago, I was up late, and it was with one of my daughters who are now grown, and I was feeding them one night and watching television, and Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat comes on, and Lifeboat is a great movie from 1944. If you know the plot, a Nazi sub has struck a boat in the Atlantic, and the survivors all on this boat together, and it's like the Love Boat, except there's no love. And at one point, they're all together, and there's Tallulah Bankhead, who's the star of the movie, and she's sleek and she's upper crust. She has this mid-Atlantic accent, and she's wearing an expensive Cartier diamond bracelet. It seems like it sparkles on cue whenever the attention is about. At one point, she turns to William Bendix. Hold on one second. Hold on. The book, of course. That's the cast. As you can see, the Love Boat, just a smaller boat and no love. Interesting though that the poster leaves off Canada Lee, the Black actor to the far right. Great actor, Cry Beloved Country, other movies he's been in, but they left him off the poster, and we can only surmise why. Anyway, Tallulah Bankhead is talking to William Bendix, and she says to him, without much provocation, "You are a low person, darling, obviously out of the gutter. The funny part of it is, I'm from the same gutter." And without missing a beat, William Bendix, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, after the Nazis have sunk the boat that they're in, he says, and guessing what gutter she's from, he says, "South Side." So naturally, to South Sider, I'm thinking, what the heck? So Bendix's Bankhead's character says that she grew up in the hard scrabble back of the yards neighborhood, which is next to the stockyards, which of course is a true neighborhood. She tells Bendix's character that she climbed out of the neighborhood and acquired the Cartier, and she called it my passport from the stockyards to the Gold Coast. Well, naturally, I laughed later on in the movie when the bracelet fell off her wrist and fell down onto the ocean. And as a native Southsider, I felt there was some justice in that. That's what you get, as we often say on the South Side. But this was not so funny. Bankhead and Bendix's banter, they're talking back and forth, is based on a bit of a truth, which is hiccups never go away when you want them to. But other than that, that Chicago South Side is seen as somewhere that you either flee or you avoid. That it has been that way since the 1900s, when the rich traded their South Side mansions on Prairie Avenue and the former Grand Boulevard, which is now King Drive, for even swankier digs on the north side along the Gold Coast. And then it happened again when thousands of whites left the South Side during the racial change of the 1960s and 1970s. And the exodus continues today as more than 200,000 residents, mostly African American, have left the South Side since 2000, chased out by crime, disinvestment, and perennially troubled public schools. But lost in this story, lost like that Cartier was lost in the depths of the ocean, is the South Side's remarkable contribution to art, to music, to culture, and to architecture. In America's leading city of architecture, most of Chicago's best places and spaces that are outside of downtown are on the South Side. And while a relative few buildings like Illinois Tech, like IIT's campus, which is Mies van der Rohe's 2 to 4 at 35th Street, have been individually celebrated, the idea of the South Side itself as a home of significant architecture has been overlooked and underdocumented by the architectural press and tourists and many Chicagoans themselves. And the idea of this William Bendix from the gutter, and the idea of Southern exposure was to shine some light on this architecture, but also talk about the communities and the history of the communities that they're contained in. So with that, let's see if we can look at some pictures. Now, this is Errol Saarinen's law library at the University of Chicago campus. Great landmark quality building from 1959. It was interesting. In a way, this building gave birth to the exhibit Southern Exposure, which was for the 2017 Architecture Biennial, which ended up becoming the book Southern Exposure. And the reason why is this. There was a documentary on Errol Saarinen the year before, 2016. Wonderful work on PBS. Included a ton of Saarinen's work and a lot of his collegiate work. And somehow I'm watching it and it's showing all kinds of things. We know his work, the St. Louis Arch, the TWA terminal in New York, which is now reused as a hotel. And they're going through all of this collegiate work. And I'm thinking, well, they got to show this. And next thing I know, the credits are rolling and it's done. And as a South Sider, born and raised, I thought to myself, well, gee, I bet if this building were on the North Side, they would have included it. I bet if this building were in the South Loop, they would have included it, the trendier parts of the city. But this building is on the South Side, 60th, near Woodlawn, far south end of the campus, probably out of sight and out of mind. And as a result, that got me to thinking that if a Saarinen can get lost, if you will, on the South Side of Chicago, forgotten, overlooked, then what else can be forgotten and overlooked? Just a great building. Look at how he uses line and form and symmetry. I mean, just a rational and wonderful building. It's on 60th Street, right by the south side of the Midway Plaisance, and it's pushed back from the street and sits behind a gate, a fence, and it is hard to kind of spot in many respects, but it really is worth the effort to come look and see. And the interior is even more striking than the exterior is. Now, this is one of my favorites in the whole city. This is Pride Cleaners at 79th and St. Lawrence in the Chatham community, built in 1959. Built in 1959 also by architect Gerald Siegert, a Chicago architect. Look at that roof. Just a beautiful parabolic, hyperbolic paraboloid roof, self-supporting. The idea behind it is, of course, is that having a self-supporting roof. Having a self-supporting roof eliminates the need for columns on the inside, which allows the space to be used economically for all the things that a dry cleaners has to do. So there's room for workers, there's room for clothes storage, there's room for all the equipment. So it's not just a folly, there's a reason why the roof is like that. But also does take advantage of a couple of things that are happening design-wise across the country, which is modernism, the kind of bow to the space age. This is beginning to affect design all over, everything from cars, tail fins on cars, to signage, to everything. And also the fact that this street that we're sort of standing on as we look north, 79th Street, is a car-dependent street. That's a streetcar-dependent street, sort of, when World War II begins, and then after the war becomes car-dependent. So the idea is that the street is a lot faster now. Traffic passes at a faster rate. And what do you do when it comes to buildings and commerce to take advantage of that change? And we see the effects of it here with this building, where you have the parking out front, so you drive right off the street into the parking lot, and the building with this unique design catches the eye. And this also comes out of Southern California, the car culture, architecture culture of Southern California, where they had perfected a way to use roadside architecture to capture the eye at 35, 40, 50 miles an hour. The next slide real quickly here. Here's the sign that goes with Pride Cleaners. Isn't that a wonderful sign? When it was new, obviously, all the letters individually lit. A friend of mine who's a sign expert believes that that little white box where it says shirts laundered, that likely spun around at one point because it's written on both sides, shirts laundered. And just a great sign. What's good to know about this building is it's not a landmark. And there was some concern about a year or two ago when it was for sale, there was some concern about it being lost. But luckily, and here's where enlightened owners play a huge role in preserving architecture. The owner at the time, it was for sale, sold it as a business, not as a tear down. And as a result, he attracted buyers who were interested in it as a business and not a tear down. And it attracted a new owner, young man from I think it's from the West Indies, who's really into the architecture of the building, and he spruced up the interior, the exterior. This board that was here when I photographed the building 3 years ago is gone. He's painted it, repainted it, hung streamers around it. It looks really good, and he wants to work with the city to do something with the sign, to restore the sign. Ultimately, I hope these steps bring him to wanting to landmark the building. But these are great steps along the way to make sure the building is saved and preserved. And it isn't clear, built as a dry cleaners and has remained a dry cleaner since 1959. Here's another interesting building. This is GN Bank at 46th and King Drive. Interesting bit of history here, both architecturally and historically. This was originally Illinois Service Federal Bank. And again, I apologize for the hiccups, guys. I really do. This was originally Illinois Service Federal Bank, which is a black-owned savings and loan that began in Bronzeville, a little bit further west, a few blocks west in Bronzeville, in the kitchen of an apartment building at the old Rosenwald Apartments, which are still existing at 47th and Michigan. When the savings and loans, and of course we know that the reason why there were black savings and loans is because it was difficult for African Americans to get loans, conventional loans, or any kind of loans from white-owned banks. So, black people, like every other ethnic group, Bohemians, others, form their own banks. And this was one. So when the bank got to a point of profit, real extreme profitability, they built this building in 1961 on King Drive. And it's a great structure, isn't it? I mean, that kind of folded concrete exterior. I like the way the bushes are trimmed, topiary even today, and it changed ownership. It's owned by a Ghanaian. It's owned by a Ghanaian family now, but still remarkable, particularly when you look at the rest of the architecture on King Drive, which is relatively traditional architecture from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. And this comes along and kind of changes things. I have to say that the inside, which I didn't photograph for the book, is worth looking at. And when this pandemic ends, it's worth taking a trip to see this bank because the interior is still largely maintained the way it was when it was built. So it looks like a place where Don Draper would have kept his money in Mad Men. This is Chicago Vocational High School. Most people see this building when they're leaving town on the Skyway near 87th Street. And when I was at the Sun-Times the first go around, as architecture critic, at least once a season I would get a comment from someone asking, what is this factory building that I see on my way out of town? And I would say, get a chance, get off the Skyway, go take a look at it, because it's one of the most remarkable Art Deco buildings that you'll see in the city. Chicago Vocational High School was built in 1941 as a trade school for 4,000 students. And a remarkable bit of foresight, the school system saw the 20th century as one that was mechanized, obviously, and would need to have a workforce that could fix cars and build things and all those things. And they put all those trades in the school. But rather than put it into a sort of a bunker of a building, they give it this graceful 2-block long campus that unfurls down 87th Street. That's marked by each end by a wing like this. This is the eastern portion of the school, and this is the gymnasium entrance. And I was a student here. I graduated from here in 1983, and you felt like royalty going in and out of that entrance and up and down those stairs. So the idea is that they knew they were building a special thing, and they celebrated it with the architecture. The concern with Chicago Vocational now is that although it was built for 4,000 students, only around 800 students go here now. And the concern is that they'll begin to demolish wings of the school to shrink it to fit its current student population, which might be fiscally prudent, but architecturally a travesty. Here's the main entrance. Now, I know I said it was built in 1941, and you say, well, Lee, if that's the case, why does it say 1938 over the door? Well, the real reason is, in typical Chicago fashion, there were construction delays, and it was late being constructed. And rather than to own up to it for 1941, they kept the original date in that inscription. But what a great building! Those graceful columns, which are, abstracted here. They're literal here, literal columns here in other parts of the building, but abstracted here. So it's a kind of a bout of modernism going on there as well. I also like the typeface, Broadway, where the school's name is written. Broadway was a typeface that had only been invented about a decade before the school was designed. So again, the idea of a modern machine-like school, but one that was still had grace and some beauty. Closer view of the columns looking upward. Now we're on the South Shore. Now, most people would see this house and they would assume it's by Frank Lloyd Wright. And in a way, they're right. They're correct, I should say. It's by John Van Bergen, an architect who worked in Wright's studio. And this house at 71st and Paxton in the South Shore community is Van Bergen's riff on Wright's house, on a Wright design to build a fireproof house for under $5,000. Van Bergen enlarges it a little bit and gives it a porch, but just a graceful house. And just one of the things about the South Shore community that's kind of overlooked, that there's a wealth of architecture, kind of a hierarchy that begins to the east along the lake with these wonderful apartment buildings. And then as you move inland, rank after rank of, mid-suburban style, substantial houses. This is the interior. Look at that fireplace, that hearth, Roman brick, beautiful woodwork. You can see the porch behind the family sitting on the couch. The man who's sitting closest to the camera, that's a built-in seat that he's in. But what a great house. And it's a landmark. It's been landmarked. And it's also on the National Register. So this house is safe, but just an example of the kind of beauty that exists in the neighborhoods. This is one of my favorites. This is the E.J. Ingram House. It's at 65th and Eberhard in the Woodlawn community, and it was built in 1959. Another modernist house, and it was built for a doctor, E.J. Ingram, and it was designed by Roger Marjoram, who was an African American architect who, early in his career, was at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, and ended up moving to Detroit and doing some great work there, and only died a few years ago. But here's another example of a house that's really designed to disrupt and really changes the way it typifies a change in design. This part of Woodlawn is a very traditionally brick, limestone, and here's a house of steel and glass and brick. About 2 years ago, it was for sale. About 3 years ago, it was for sale for $150,000. And see if we can get inside. And it had no buyers for a while. It was bought. A new owner bought it. I guess maybe developer bought it. Made some changes on the inside that I probably wouldn't have liked. But the house is for sale again for now. I think it's $300,000 or close to it. But this is one of the interesting features that I liked about the house. So the house has a side entrance, and it leads directly. The side entrance leads directly to this staircase. And when you go down the staircase leads directly to a bar. And I thought, if that isn't the 1950s, I don't know what is. That curved wall separates the entrance from the living room. But yeah, you open the doors, get your mail, you go down the staircase, and you go directly to a bar. One of the features of the home, this is on the other side of that curved wall, that still worked, was a intercom system in the house. And very, very mid-century, very modern. The daughter of the owner passed away, but the daughter, is still around, a young woman, and still around, and she tells interesting stories about the house, about how unique it looked at the time, and how people would mistake it for a community center. They would say there's a community center on 63rd and whatever, and people would assume that this house was it because it looked so institutional. Englewood is an interesting community also. Was a suburb like many other Chicago neighborhoods, and in the 1890s gets annexed by the city. And here's one of the grand buildings that remained from that time. This is the Yale Apartments at 65th and Yale. Great building. And once this pandemic lifts and you ever get a chance to get in there, the Chicago Architecture Foundation's Open House Chicago often has tours there during their Open House Chicago tour time, which is around this time of the year. It's a great building, and it also is an example of what can happen when the city makes an investment in these communities, as opposed to just rolling the bulldozer when their building is in trouble. When I first saw this building 25 years ago, it was on the demolition list. I was at the Sun-Times then as architecture critic. The bricks, had at least to be 5 shades darker, with wear, trash on the inside. This is one of those interesting apartment buildings, one of only two in the city that are left, that has a courtyard space on the inside where the apartments ring an interior space, and there's a skylight above. And you've seen all those mystery movies from years past where the bad guy's in a cage elevator and he's usually going up the stairs, going up the elevator, chasing someone or something, and every floor you can just see apartments that ring the central core. This is one of them. And there's this one in the Brewster Apartments on the north side. And then there was the Mecca Apartments, which IIT demolished in the 1950s to build Crown Hall. In this case, the city in the 90s did not demolish the building, worked with the developer, put in, applied low-income housing tax credits, senior housing tax credits, and saved this building, really created an asset in the neighborhood. This is the entrance. This is building was designed by John T. Long, who was a student of Louis Sullivan, and you can tell with just some of the treatment of the limestone, the detailing of the limestone. What a great building. This is one of the great, sad stories, but not so sad stories, but that kind of typifies some issues with the South Side. This is a Frank Lloyd Wright house from 1900. This is the Foster. This is the Foster house and stable. There's a stable behind the house. Built in 1900, like I mentioned earlier, for an attorney, and this was his summer home. And the house is pretty much in the condition that Wright designed it. And it came up for sale a couple of years ago for 3 years ago, for $175,000, and no takers, no buyers. And the problem is that oftentimes houses in this neighborhood, West Pullman, Roseland, Inglewood, Grand Crossing, many of the network of neighborhoods on the South Side, many of them, these houses are approaching a century old. And as a result, you need a loan to buy them. But oftentimes you need a loan to rehab them. And as a result, the price of the purchase and the rehab is more than the value of the house, which makes banks not want to loan you the money to do it, particularly in a neighborhood where houses in foreclosure, you could buy a house with the same square footage, but not the same pedigree, for $90,000, $95,000. Luckily this summer though, a buyer did step forward. He did put together something, and he did buy it for $135,000. And so everyone's watching to see what happens. This is a case of a house that does have landmark status, so there isn't a fear of it being demolished. But without an owner, there's also the fear of demolition by neglect. But luckily, hopefully, that fear hopefully is abated. Gives a look at the inside of the house. I mean, this was taken before the current owner bought it. I'm tempted to call him up to see if he's pulled up this carpet yet, to see the floors look like. But what a staircase. Look how it winds around the corner there. I mean, just a great piece of architecture. But yeah, I'm curious to see what that floor looks like. Here's a fireplace with a built-in to the right. It's well done. Just well done. Churches play an important role on the South Side, West Side, throughout the city, as immigrants, migrants from the South. Everyone who came to the city built their own religious buildings. And this is First Church of Deliverance, First Church of the Deliverance at 43rd and Wabash. Really unique in that it's an art modern church that is actually an adaptive reuse. It was a hat factory that was recladded, and this is, believe it or not, this is terracotta, all those tiles you see, and re-engineered to create an open worship space. The architect was Walter Thomas Bailey, who was Illinois' first licensed Black architect, and his kind of partner in crime, Charles Sumner Duke, who was the state's first licensed Black, who was the state's first licensed Black structural engineer. But look at what they created on the inside. Those towers, by the way, this church has interesting histories. It was founded by Clarence Cobb, Reverend Clarence Cobb. It was an early mega church in a way. They could fill up Old Kaminsky Park with their revivals. They had a national radio ministry. When the Hammond Organ Company created the Hammond B3 organ, they gave one of the first ones to this church because of the radio ministry. They knew that their device, their instrument would be heard. But look at that space. Isn't that a great space? A lighted cross, suspended from the ceiling. Those are doves that are inside. Each of those lights is a little dove. Now, the good thing about this church is that after I took this photograph, they've had some work done with the help of Landmarks Illinois and others, and those towers are cleaned up a bit. Towers are called Alpha and Omega, nicknamed by Reverend Cobb, and they're slowly they're putting back the original windows to the exterior. Many of these spaces, these windows, were not originally glass block, although it kind of fits the modern feel of the church. But they're being replaced with divided light windows, and you go by there, and it looks really good. So it's worth a trip. If ever I do a sequel to the book, I'm going to replace this picture with one that shows what it looks like now. As we get to the end, one of the great oases, great hidden spots on the South Side. This looks like it could be Jackson Park or Washington Park, but this is actually Auburn Park. This kind of the hidden park that's north of 79th Street, between Vincennes to the east and the Rock Island Tracks to the west. And it was built in the 1880s as kind of a getaway neighborhood that was far from the city. People who were involved with the Chicago Board of Trade were involved in developing this area. And this is another example of what can happen when you give these neighborhoods the investments that they need. This place had deteriorated over the years. When I was a young reporter back in the 80s, you could either pull a body or a car out of this thing every spring or summer. The neighbors rallied with their political leadership and compelled the city to fix it up. And here it is, 25, 30 years on, and it's still very much an asset in the community. It hasn't sparked rehab and redevelopment around the area as of yet, but it's used by the citizens, by the residents, just as a place like this should be used, as a place to relax and to get away. And also to fish. If you look to the right, extreme right by the tree, if you look real closely, there's a man fishing there. The park district puts a variety of fish in here, and people fish and they gather, and it's such a surprising little space there on the south side that many people don't know is there. Briefly, we were talking about cemeteries before we came aboard, came online here. Here is Oakwood Cemetery on the south side, 68th, 69th, and 67th and Stony Island. Here's one view of one of the lakes that are within there. We talk a lot about how people like Frederick Law Olmsted and others changed the way park design was being done, but at the same time, there was also a similar movement going through cemetery design, and the idea was to take the cemetery out of this idea of the old boneyard behind the church, the old spooky graveyard, and to design it in a way with lakes and pathways, even places to sit, to give you a sense of what the afterlife was like. So as you're taking your loved one to their final resting place, you are getting a sense of what that loved one will see on the other side of the veil, if you will. And you can't go there now. Your turn will come. But in the meantime, there is this. Here's a sense of what they're seeing. And these cemeteries in the early days, they would invite people they would invite people to picnic. I mean, they're really used like parks. But just a great experience. Oakwood is worth driving through. There's all kinds of people buried there, from Cap Anson to Ida B. Wells to Jesse Owens, Big Jim Colosimo, the mobster. And it's just also, in addition to being a beautiful place, it's a living textbook to Chicago history. Now, as we get to the end, the story of Chicago architecture isn't all of South Side architecture. Isn't all in the past. Here is the Levazorio Youth Center at 76th and Aberdeen and the Auburn Gresham community. It was designed by Jeannie Gang, celebrated architect who's now completing Vista Tower and it's really well known for Aqua Tower. And this building opened at the same time as Aqua Tower. Aqua got all the attention as well as it should. But this building, which does interesting things with concrete forms and shapes and sunlighting, daylighting, the idea of contouring a window in the position of it to allow the maximum amount of sunlight to shine in. This building didn't really get the attention that it deserved. And that's why I put it in the book. But what a great community space. I mean, oftentimes in working class and poorer neighborhoods, child care centers and preschools are often dismal architecture, just sort of like the bare minimum. But here was an idea to design a building that had some life and some vitality. Inside, the stairs are very wide, the landings are very wide, so the kids can play and create there as well as go up and down. Just a great building. And one of the other things that good architecture and good design can do, that's so needed on the South Side, it's to kind of heal and bridge the sins of the past, if you will. And one of the many egregious sins of the past has been the way the near South Side communities, the ones between Hyde Park to the south and the edge of downtown to the north, have been cut off from the lake. Not enough bridge access, and what bridges that were there were very old. The bridge that this replaces, or maybe not, yeah, the bridge that this replaces was this rickety wooden bridge that was so bad. I remember back in 1998, December of 98, the city, to kick off its plan for transformation, its plan to demolish public housing high-rises, they kicked it off by imploding a set of high-rise buildings that would be behind me, if you will. And I was looking to get a picture of it, and I stood on the old bridge, and a cop comes behind me, and he asked me to come off the bridge because he didn't think the bridge would hold once the buildings were dynamited. That's the kind of access that these neighborhoods had to one of the most beautiful open spaces and one of the most beautiful bodies of fresh water in the world. In the years since, there's been one bridge to the north of this one. This is the newest so far by EXP and Corrigan and Clark Associates, completed in 17 or 18, I can't remember one. But very Chicago bridge, very muscular, very structural. The blue matches the sky, but it's also kind of a Chicago blue as well. And it'll be joined by another bridge further south by a few blocks. And again, it'll begin to put back, heal back the wound that was caused by these neighborhoods, not having the access that they so richly deserve. And lastly, these two pictures of the 95th Street L station, red line. And, it's the red line because it's red. You can see it's very, very red. And the work, there's a new terminal on they replaced the one on the north side of 95th Street. And then they built this bridge over 95th Street that leads to this space as well, where, so you can board trains, deboard trains, without having to cross busy 95th Street. You can just come over across the bridge. But this goes to show that the story of architecture on the South Side continues. So with that, I'd like to again ask 1,000 pardons for my hiccups and see what the crowd has to say.
Thank you, Lee. What a feast for the eyes, and thank you for persevering through the hiccup.
Thank you.
All right, we will start our Q&A in just a few minutes. So please start thinking about questions and entering them into the chat box. First, however, we will listen to a brief musical interlude, look at a slideshow of past society's programs, and collect donations. Contributions will be virtually at the ethicalhumanistsociety.org/donate, or with Zelle. Use for Zelle, use donate@ethicalhuman.org. We suggest a donation of $5 and of course appreciate any amount that you are comfortable with. It is through our generosity that we show how meaningful the Sunday programs are to us. And thank you to all who sustain the society with their donations of time and money. Okay, now it's time for Q&A. All right, the first couple of questions were the same ones that I had. I don't know, I'm not seeing Lee yet, so I'm not sure if, there you go. All right, good. Okay, so this, the questioner stole the questions from me. There are many architectural tours in Chicago. First, what do you recommend? And second, are there architectural tours of Southside? And if not, you should start a company. And that was my little addendum. So tell us what you recommend generally, if there are Southside Chicago tours, and if not, somebody should start.
I agree. And they're not many. And sometimes they're not as regular as, let's say, the CAF tours downtown are, where the boat leaves at this time every day, and or the docents will be out in the street. There isn't much of that happening on the South Side. There are some tours you can catch around Hyde Park, for example. There are home tours. For example, I live in Pullman, and there's a Pullman house tour every year, so you kind of get those. But much of what you see in the book and what I showed today, that beyond the scope of many of the tours, I do recommend highly the Chicago Architecture Foundation. Sorry, their open house Chicago every fall. You get a chance to see hundreds of buildings that you never get a chance to see, and I think that's a good one to follow until something more developed, more advanced happens.
Great. All right. Sorry, I'm just gonna my screen a little bit. All right. A couple of questions relate to gentrification. How do you encourage investment in these neighborhoods without encouraging gentrification? And there is another one, just generally, what are your thoughts on gentrification in the South Loop?
Well, good question. I mean, let's see if I get the last one first. Gentrification in the South Loop, in many respects, from a real estate standpoint and maybe a livability standpoint, it's been encouraging. The South Loop, I'm 55, and the South Loop of my my young adult years, complete. You wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know that place today. Their families living there, their schools. I mean, and that's good. And that's good. The problem is with it, though, it takes a bit of culture away. And what I mean by that is this: in the South Loop, there were African American nightclubs. There were Black-owned places where house music was incubated and created. All of that is gone now. I mean, there was no way to, no one thought to put the two together or to retain one or the other. I think that's the fear in Pilsen, right? Mexican community on the near South Side, near West Side, where gentrifiers are coming in and they're pushing out people, and some people are leaving voluntarily. If grandmama can get, good piece of money for a house by selling it, I don't blame her. But I think what's at risk is some of the unique Mexican culture and restaurants and street life that's there, that tends to be lost when that kind of stuff happens. How do you do it in a way that doesn't push out people? I think the first question was. That's the tough part. I mean, I think Pilsen becomes an interesting example where the Alderman wants to create not a landmark district, but a district where houses can't be torn down readily. And the idea is that that will help keep people in the neighborhood. And then a landmark district, which puts an overlay of restrictions on what you can do to the house and how repairs to the exterior of the house must be done. In his view, actually push people away faster who already live there. So we still got to figure it out. And then Chicago also has this odd thing, which you don't see in Fort Greene, in New York, or some other places, where whites won't live in an African American neighborhood by and large. So when we talk about gentrification, we're largely not talking about gentrification by whites into black neighborhoods in Chicago. Just isn't quite what's happening. And the other piece of it is that when middle class black people move into a neighborhood, like is the case with Bronzeville, the resources don't follow. They'll often follow the white counterpart. So there aren't the restaurants and the cleaners and the cool places that come in. Those don't come when African Americans come in. So it's still it's still tough.
Yeah, and there's a question that I think dovetails, maybe it's more of a comment, that dovetails what you just said, which is how do we balance the inclination to preserve through landmark with inclination to empower communities to change and shape themselves. And I think the example that you raised of Pilsen, where they're trying to restrict what can be done to structures, which actually might have the effect of pushing current residents out. And I guess it's just trade-offs, just how to balance those trade-offs. And I mean, I'll ask about the vocational school that you attended. What are some ideas for preserving that building, recognizing the reality that the student body is what it is? So is there a possibility of repurposing it and relocating the school or combining the school with something else? I mean, what are some ideas?
I think all those things have to be looked at. I think the first thing that probably has to happen is give it landmark status so the building is protected. And then, think of the solutions. There was a plan to create a STEM academy there, which would have been great. I mean, it would have been almost returning the school to what its original purposes. Mm-hmm. And some money was allocated for it, but I'm not sure what exactly has happened. It was allocated under the Manuel administration. But I think you're right that some kind of new purpose that drives in new student bodies, that drives in new students, and something to create a new sheen for the school. I mean, one of the things about the Southeast side is that there's still a lot of factories, a lot of blue collar jobs over here. And a friend of mine was telling me about a year and a half ago that Ford, Ford has a plant on Torrance Avenue, and they had some new, car making gizmo that they had put in there. And and they were thinking, boy, wouldn't it be nice if people could come to us already trained to work this set of gizmo. So these kind of things, I think, can be put into these schools to well, at least a portion of it, becomes straight vocational training the way it used to be. Same for Bowen High School too, which is also a beautiful architectural school. Looks like Schurz High School. It's his twin that's nearby.
Are you hopeful that the Obama Center will bring more attention to the South Side? Maybe bring more tourists there?
No. Well, I think that it'll bring more tourists to Hyde Park, and it could be a few more to the northern end of neighboring South Shore. But there's this sense. I think the Obama Foundation pushes this a bit. Is that there's Nothing on this, there's nothing here on this part of the South Side, and but the Museum of Science and Industry is there, already there. One of the most respected and most attended museums in the nation, and this would join that. And does the Museum of Science and Industry, does it help the South Side as good as it is? No, it doesn't. So I think there'll be some good that comes out of it, but the idea that it could be this panacea for the South Side, I think isn't really the case. Also, the point that the book makes, the South Side is 186 square miles, so it's the size of Philadelphia. That's just south of Roosevelt Road, right? No one would argue that putting a presidential library in Philadelphia would save all of Philadelphia. So it's going to take large interventions throughout the South Side to create the kind of change that's needed.
Here's a question. When Southside buildings are left off of documentaries or best of lists, is that racism, a lack of knowledge, or some unfortunate combination of both?
The book argues directly that it's racism. That these are places that when doing the research for the book, you could find information about some of these places until the neighborhood turned black. And all of a sudden, the only thing that was written about the neighborhood was crime and shooting. I mean, the architecture of it, was totally wiped off the map, and it becomes flyover country. So I think racism, if it isn't the chief cause, it is certainly one of the chief causes of what's going on. That it's clear that when these neighborhoods become black, it's like the switch turns off, and whatever histories that are there, with the exception of Bronzeville, that's largely because Bronzeville has this great history of jazz and entertainment.
Where's my computer?
But yeah, I think it's race.
Another question related to the Obama Presidential Center. What are your views on its architectural design and the choice of location? I suppose, yeah, we already covered that, but just in terms of just the design.
All right, so I'm going to tip very carefully here because I'm trying to run afoul of the day job of being on the Sun-Times editorial board. So speaking purely as the author of Southern Exposure, in the book I mentioned that I don't like the design. I think that there's a couple of things at fault. The building has a tower that's 20 stories tall, and they're building it in the park. And the justification for the tower was it's democratic. It's a democratic way to access the land. And I think nope, the democratic way to access a park is to leave it a park. So I don't like the tower. I think that the design is presented. I think it's too stony. I think it's too right-angled and hard-edged. I think that if a building has to be built, whoops, I'm sorry, did I cut you guys?
No, I can hear you.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, we're good.
I think if a building has to be built in a park, it should look like the park gave birth to it. It should look organic. It should be organic. This complex looks plunked down in the park, which is exactly what it is. Should it be built in a park? I wrestle with that a bit. I mean, we've built museums and parks before. The Noterbird Nature Center in Lincoln Park is a good example. That's kind of recent. I think if it's done right, it could be good. My feeling is and said it's not done right.
Can you comment on the Avalon and Capitol theaters? The Avalon is probably down for COVID. What is going on with the Capitol?
The Capitol is at 79th and Halsted, or Ashland. I always get confused. But one of the good old neighborhood theaters that didn't get torn down. I was in there about 5 or 6 years ago. I want to say it's used for religious services, but not every Sunday. I think if a church invites a gospel singer, or there's some kind of large scale confab or something that happens there, but it is used. The Avalon, is big, beautiful Moorish inspired theater that's owned by a young man who doesn't quite have the capital to put it together. And one of the things that's kind of troubling is that the city, which under Rahm Emanuel was willing at least to give assistance to the Uptown Theater, which is in far worse condition, hasn't been as willing to help the Avalon, and I can't quite figure that one. Sorry, can't quite figure that one out. But there's been, as of late, under this administration, plans for 79th, plans for South Shore, strategic plans, visioning plans, and the city is including that the Avalon Theater in part of those plans, which is a symbolic step, but an important symbolic step, because at least the city is looking at it, not ignoring it, not saying it doesn't exist, not letting it fall, not standing by while it falls in, not helping yet, but at least this is a good step toward hopefully ultimately providing some help.
Here's a question about, are there any better plans for the old U.S. Steel property between 87th and 79th along the lake?
God, I wish there were. I mean, this is 500 acres. So if you could imagine, that's about the size of downtown Chicago. All, right on the lake, and nothing. As Professor Dominic Pasiga said in my book, he said something like, if this were on the north side, the Amazons of the world will be trying to relocate there. The last plans that fell through last year before last, which were kind of shaky to begin with, were for some kind of prefab housing out of Brazil or South America that was supposed to go there. Nothing happened. My sense is, and I argue for this, I talk about this in a book. My sense is that that it should be a park. About 500 acre park. If that's what it takes, but a park. Parks are one thing. Parks is the one thing that we do right in this city historically. And I think if if no houses come around it, then that's the way that goes. But I think that but the city has also historically been good at using parks as tools of redevelopment. So as opposed to planning the real estate and putting the park space around it, I think in this case you do it the other way around. You do a well-designed destination kind of park, and then the real estate hopefully comes around. And if it doesn't, you've got this great destination.
I wanted to ask about your professional path. So what are you trained in, sort of formally, and how did you come to be an expert on, history, architecture, photography, clearly? So tell us about yourself and your professional path.
Well, it's funny what happens by happenstance. I mean, my training was, as obviously as a journalist, and I was a hard news reporter from 1988 to 96. First at the City News Bureau, and then at the Chicago Sun-Times, and that was the pathway that I saw. I mean, there's some of the grisliest stuff in the city during that time I covered. And what happened was, oddly enough, is my second of three daughters, Cassandra, was born, and I had some time off work. And during my time off work, I thought about doing something else for a living. And when I came back to work, because it was fun being home with. I had two daughters, then two and a newborn, and it was fun being home with them, and it was fun kind of enjoying time with them. And I thought, well, maybe I want to do something else in my life that's less hectic. And by the time I got back to work, we got an editor from London who just got hired, who liked architecture, wanted to create an architecture beat. And I asked for the beat. I still to this day don't know completely why I asked for it. My logic was the beat I actually wanted was transportation. But if I asked for architecture, because I had no training in it, I thought he would say no and give me a transportation. That doesn't make any sense. But I was younger. And he gave me architecture. And I thought this could be good. So I had to learn it. But what I found out very quickly, and I talk about this in a book, was that a lot of it was kind of, my father was like me, like a lay architecture person. And, I grew up, looking at buildings, dry cleaners, other structures around, not thinking anything about it, right? Not thinking that there was a career pathway. So in a way, it made sense that it would all come together. Only, I wouldn't have been smart enough to put it together. It kind of fell together. And then, 25 years in, you just learn, you pick up and you learn everything. And the city was really kind. Architecture firms in Chicago, particularly big ones, Helmut Jahn's firm, SOM, others, were great about having me come in and tell me about their projects and answer the dumbest questions I may have had. And then after a while, you kind of acquire them. And in Chicago, the history of the city is told through its buildings. So there's always this linkage between the building and the people. And lastly, writing for the Sun-Times, the idea was to come up with an architecture beat coverage that was different from the Tribune's, right? Because, you didn't need two, Blair Kamin's a friend, but you didn't need two Blair Kamins. I had to be different, particularly since I was the Johnny-come-lately to the mix. So the idea was to push preservation, the political and historical reasons why buildings were built and maintained, and kind of put all that into the mix.
That's a great story. Great story. I love the chanciness of it. Awesome. Let's see. Okay, I guess we'll make this our final questions. If you were king for a day, that's not what the question says, but if you were king for a day, what would be your first 3 steps to revitalize the South Side?
To cure my hiccups. Let's see, 3 steps. One is, and I kind of, so far, I like the mayor's Invest Southwest plan. This is the idea to channel $750 million of city investment in hopes of leveraging private investment to target the retail corridors of 10 communities. I think that's just the kind of thing that's needed to jumpstart these areas. The problem is, and this isn't necessarily the mayor's problem, well, it is the mayor's problem, but it isn't necessarily the mayor's fault. $750 million over 3 years is better than no money, but it's just a drop in the bucket. To give you an example, that Red Line station that I showed you at 95th Street, that one station was $300 million in one neighborhood. So imagine $750 million excuse me, over 3 years over to neighborhoods. So one would be to find a way somehow to increase that Southwest investment exponentially. The one thing is I think that we have to take a look at the way houses are appraised on the South Side and West Side. I mean, we see study after study after study about houses being appraised lower on the South and West sides of Chicago and in their counterparts of the cities than white areas, even when the amenities are roughly the same. And I think the papers had a story a couple of weeks ago about a couple, interracial couple, who, when their house, when they got their house appraised, and when the appraiser could tell that the house was owned by somebody Black because the white was Black, it got an appraisal $60,000 lower than it got when they realized, the owners, what was happening. And it had to erase the wife's ethnicity out of the decor of the house. And once they did that, it got appraised for $60,000 more. Imagine that happening over 186 square miles of real estate, and imagine the wealth that's robbed out of that place. So fixing that. Lastly, banks have a role to play in this too. WBEZ did a piece a few months ago that said, even Chase Bank, using them as an example, they made more loans in Lincoln Park alone, home loans, between, 2012 and now, more home loans in Lincoln Park than they did the entirety of the South Side. So these are the kind of structural things that have to be removed in order to make better, make things better for the South Side. We conveniently tell ourselves it's the people. Well, if they wouldn't riot, if they wouldn't break out the window, if they wouldn't put the trash in the street, and then when you look, there's something after a Cubs game, there's trash in the streets, but it gets cleaned up. After a major team sports victories, there's windows that get broken out, but it's seen differently on one side of the city than it's seen in the other. So these are the structural things that we have to somehow deal with, because what we're realizing, I think, with this administration, with this administration, but also largely with the kind of post-George Floyd world that we're living in, is that we can no longer in Chicago have two Chicagos. We could do it in the past. We could point to Millennium Park and cover your eyes over Cabrini Green and say, see, Chicago is successful. Now we're saying we can't do that anymore. And very briefly, I think one of the most poetic things said to me this year, if not in years, was when Michigan Avenue, the Magnificent Mile, had the broken windows and the looting and the other things. A young man from Roseland, which is the community just over from me in Pullman, he said the first thing he thought of was, now your Michigan Avenue looks like my Michigan Avenue. So Michigan Avenue runs south through Roseland and is a mile-long business district that's distressed. So we're seeing that we can't have these two Chicagos anymore. We can't afford it, and it'll strangle us unless we fix it.
Thank you again. Thank you again. And to close out today's presentation, I will share with you a quote from Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, who said, "Architecture is a language. When you are good, you can be a poet." And thank you, Lee, for sharing some Southside poetry with us today. Thank you all for coming and join us for coffee.